Hi, my name is Daniel Mackenzie, and welcome to my second video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the Overlocker, a brief history about the machine and its development, as well as setting this particular one up. I have used overlockers, they are great, but I've never actually threaded one. So this particular overlocker was picked up from a eBay seller a few months ago. I've been meaning to make a video about it, and here it is. It's a baby lock, and it was made in Japan, and its model number is a BL3407. I've been meaning to set it up, and researching how to do that, I eventually just taught myself a brief history of the machine's development, and I've decided to share that information with you guys, if you're interested. So an overlocker, also known as a serger, is a machine that does the edges of fabrics in such a way that it's harder for the fabric to actually fray apart. And this enables basically a longer life for the garment or upholstery or whatever you're using the fabric for. Overlockers tend to have a cutting blade on the inside over here, right next to the needle, which also helps to cut the fabric exactly along the edge where it's being overlocked. Every piece of clothing you've bought from a store is likely to have at least a part of it overlocked. So they're pretty versatile machines, and they're very cool to look at when they operate. Honestly, I believe this. It's just this sort of incredibly smooth dance of arms and linkages that you can watch doing the same curve motion back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it produces such a fascinatingly technical result for a human to replicate. Alright, let's start. So in the beginning, we need our threads. And different overlockers require different numbers of threads depending on the stitch you've selected the machine to do. Some can do 4, 5, and even 2. This machine can actually use a 2-thread stitch or a 3-thread stitch. We're just going to do a 3-thread stitch, which is also one of the more common stitches you can see an overlocker do. They're all polyester, but they're all different brands. We need to extend this guy, which is just an arm which helps to hold the thread and guide it to the next slot which it has to go through. But it's a bit, ooh, oh, there we go, nice. I actually don't know why it has to be that tall. It does seem really high up. So you have this here, so this is our first thread, and it's all the same plastic. Alright, well, we have them. We shall start with pulling it up through the top holes. I hope you guys are finding this interesting. Hey! From this point on, there are a lot of little levers and handles and parts which the threads go through. I've seen some examples of overlockers where there's a sticker inside on a plate or part of the machine that shows how you thread, but I haven't found one. I mean, unless there's another part, honestly. Like, oh, that's so cool. That's fantastic. Oh, it's a little like cabinet thing that you keep spare parts in. Oh, needles. Great. Tweezers. Okay, this makes a lot of sense because I've seen a few overlocking videos where they used tweezers to pull the thread through the whole thing, so that's what these are for. And most importantly, the vital, you'll see it in the next shot, the vital sticker that tells you how to thread it. Good. This is going to get a lot easier. I'm going to start with this one. So the overlocker's history goes through a lot of different events. You wouldn't think that a machine meant for sewing purposes would have a very exciting history, but interestingly enough, it could be argued that the birth of the overlocker can be indirectly thanked to a factory blowing up in America. It was in 1822 when a man by the name of J. Makins Marrow would find that his gunpowder mill had exploded. His mill was based in Connecticut, and with his factory basically blown up and destroyed, he had a choice: give up, restart the process, or do something completely different. On the same plot of land in Connecticut where his former gunpowder mill once stood, he decided to build a new factory, and in 1838 opened the J. M. Merrill and Son Knitting Factory, which was actually one of the first knitting factories in the entire United States. 39 years later, in 1877, Joseph M. Merrill, the then president of the company, would invent and patent a new device, the world's first crochet machine, essentially the world's first production overlocker. So, while the Merrills had found the muse of innovation in 1877, fate decided to give them another slap in the face. In 1893, the mill was destroyed again, this time by fire. To play things a bit differently, the Merrills decided not to continue operating on the same grounds. Instead, they moved the company to Hartford, and there they rebranded themselves again, this time as the Merrill Machine Company. This is still the same name the company has today. While all of this was going on for the Merrills, they weren't the only ones innovating in this field. In 1857, a Virginian farmer by the name of James Edward Allen Gibbs would patent his own machine, a single-thread chain-stitch sewing machine. He eventually partnered with another James Wilcox, and they together formed the Wilcox and Gibbs Sewing Machine Company. Now, these two big companies would eventually see each other on the battlefields of court. In 1905, the Merrills would sue Wilcox and Gibbs, and they won the rights to the first crochet machine. They were the inventors, after all. This didn't seem to stop Wilcox and Gibbs, who actually still exist today as well. Both the Merrill Machine Company and the Wilcox and Gibbs Sewing Machine Company are still active, and they still manufacture overlockers and sewing machines. Moving on from that point, overlockers, you must remember, were only industrial. They all were sunk into some kind of table with just the top parts of the machines sticking out. And, well, that was it. There were no domestic versions. Finalizing of edges, it would seem, was left to the factories and industry. That is until the 1960s, where from here our story moves to the other side of the world. We leave the Americans and move to Japan. In 1964, a group of Japanese engineers and managers at a Japanese enterprise decided that, why are there no domestic overlockers? Let's make one. They set out to make a overlocker that was smaller and lighter than all overlockers that came before it. They needed the blessings of the enterprise. They were really confident that they had a good idea here, so they brought it to the heads of the enterprise. And the enterprise said no. The entire group of managers and engineers who were so sure of the need of a domestic overlocker decided to hand in their resignation papers and leave. Instead, they went to form their own company, Babylock. The domestic overlocker had now come into the world, and for the first time, the home user could easily give their home garments or clothing or upholstery that same factory industry finish. However, this was just in Japan. It eventually was the actions of an American company that ended up being the bridge connecting east to west. The Tacony Corporation was founded in 1946 by Mr. Nick Tacony. When he founded the business, it was simply a small operation that took place in the basement of his house, where he would buy old machines, especially broken sewing machines, and fix them up and sell them. By the point which we're at in the Overlocker's story, he had grown his company for several decades. It was said that he always tried to stay aware of the consumer demands of his time. When the domestic overlocker entered the scene, he had the foresight to start importing them into America. It really was the introduction of the domestic overlocker into the West. Finally, the American household didn't have to only rely on a sewing machine and could achieve the same level of finishing that commercial garment makers were realizing with their overlockers. This particular model of overlocker made by Babylock came out in 1978, so for it, that's where the story ends. But developments have kept growing. Babylock themselves have 14 patents to their name, all in developments of overlocking technology, and they still produce overlockers today. One of the more interesting developments is something called jet air threading. On older overlockers like mine, you have to manually insert the thread into the lower loopers, which have very small holes and it can be difficult to do so. With jet air threading, a burst of air helps to push the thread into the lower looper and thus make threading your overlocker easier. The overlocker has gone a long way to reach the stage which it's at today, and further development will surely come. One of the interesting figures in the overlocker's history is a man by the name of Mr. Sakuma, who is often credited with the invention of the baby lock. In 1997, he gave a speech where he addressed the term that had emerged, Sakuma magic, which had been used to describe his machine. He said, "Experience has taught me that mystical magic is the result of many years of hard work, full of trials and errors." And really, what better way is there to sum up the Overlocker's history than that statement? A history full of moments of trials and errors and disasters that could have really derailed this machine's creation. From a factory exploding to its again catching on fire, to lawsuits over patent ideas, to stubborn managers refusing requests for development. And then you have the people who still push forward, the Marrows with their first ideas, Wilcox and Gibbs coming up with their versions, those Japanese managers and engineers who bravely quit their jobs because they really believed their idea was worth striving for. It all really speaks to the incredible innovation that humanity is able to achieve once we put our minds to something, which gives me such appreciation for this machine and everything that went into it becoming what it is today. Alright, so here's the moment. I've spent a while setting up the tension knobs, did a few trial and errors, and I think we may have something good. So let's give it a go. It's a little bit loose. It could do some more adjusting, but that's the best result I've got so far. In fact, I'd say that's an overlock stitch. Well, that about wraps it up. I hope you learned something new, and thanks again for joining me in another video. Maybe you'll think of a machine that you never really thought of that much before that you'll now want to look into its history. There's some incredible stories out there. But yes, hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one. So before we end the video, I would like to give a big shout out to my one subscriber. He's actually a good friend of mine by the name of Shazeb. So Shazeb, thank you for supporting me from the beginning, and let's see where we go together on this big adventure. In the meantime, for everybody else, if you're interested in knowing where the facts and information for this video came from, just look to the right side of the screen. I'll be putting all the links up in order, as well as putting them in the description box below for easier access. So till then, everybody stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you all in the next one.